Seraphim 432, this is Red Nova. I adjusted my vision as the screen in front of me fizzled static, trying to maintain my connection. We've just crossed into neutral space, awaiting orders on how to proceed from here. The voice of a great, powerful being sounded directly in my ears, both ancient and imposing. You are to proceed directly ahead until you have reached the Shik system. You will encounter a nebula field in Proxima. The voice quickly retracted from my head. I assumed he'd meant to say approximately now, seeing as every attempt to contact my handler thereafter fell on completely deaf ears, telltale signs of an approaching nebula, if ever there were any. What are our instructions? The Flesian captain ahead of me asked, reclining in her seat. Most of this ship's crew were Flesians, who were red-skinned, tall and wide, boasting 4 arms and 1 large, artificially enhanced orange eye. Their physical strength was only matched by their technological prowess. Continue straight ahead. Nebula's gonna stretch for a good bit, but I didn't get how long. I guess they don't want us taking any detours. Understood. My system auto-translated her short, barked response. The captain regarded me with nothing shy of disdain, and it had been the same way ever since I'd first boarded this vessel. I understood it somewhat. She didn't enjoy taking her orders from the only primitive human on board the ship, just as little as she enjoyed the fact that I was the only one on board that the godlike entities known as Seraphim would even deign to speak to, let alone give full-on instructions towards. I'm going to go and get some food if that's okay. I closed my system menu, which was buzzing with increasing levels of static. I got up to leave the command room, walking past buzzing red and blue consoles and at least 15 officers. You want anything from the mess hall? Asterisk, stop polluting my ears and leave, the captain snapped back at me. It was enough to jar me speechless for a moment, but also enough to make every other lieutenant and officer in sight stand alert. The room's atmosphere rapidly grew both thick and tense. For a moment, everyone looked as if they were afraid to move. An errant fly stopped buzzing, scared to anger the still air. Then I snickered at her. All right, I'll get out of your hair. See ya. I wasn't blind to it. I noticed the collective sigh of relief when I opened the blast doors behind me and departed. The sigh of the flippant captain included, who I now realize doesn't have hair. / wandering around the spacious Flesian ship corridors was at least somewhere on the way to calming. It often let me order my thoughts a little. I flexed the gauntlet of my armor, feeling an itch forming beneath. Grand Enforcer Cyrus. Both clarity of thought and potential peace of mind were ground into fucking dust as Prishita approached me, waving both left hands at the same time in greeting, a large, toothy smile on her face. Well, Flesians didn't exactly smile, but Prishita was definitely trying, even if the result looked more pained than joyous. I looked up at the young private, who was about 3 feet taller than me. She walked a single step for every 3 I took. I heard we're more than halfway towards System 349B. Now, is that true? I'm sure whoever told you is better at reading space charts than I am. Basically true of Flesian aboard this ship. I was both new at it and atrocious. Awesome! She slammed the ground as she walked, easily more than double my weight, but armed with an impressively muscular physique like nearly all of her kind. I hope 349B is interesting. 1307D was a drag. I barely got to do anything there, and the air was really thin. She was easily the most inquisitive and energetic alien I'd ever met, and she kept buzzing around me like a bulldozer. I rolled my eyes at her display. D-class planets typically aren't that interesting, from what I've heard. Little sapient life and low ambient mana levels equal not much to do besides the job. And seeing as you're usually the only one doing the job, that means there's basically shit all else for us to do. It sucks, man. It was true. As an enforcer, aka Grand Enforcer, but I wasn't a fan of the title, in training, I was meant to rely as little on the surrounding crew as possible to carry out on-planet duties. And 1307D had actually been one of the simplest issues I'd faced yet. It was my first mission working with the Flesians, and had taken months to arrive at what was essentially a crater of rare and valuable metals in a highly primitive world, and dispose of the commodities in question. After all, the angels didn't want the evolutionary trajectory of the planet's inhabitants being affected so greatly. They were to be kept in the dark. I'm sure we can find you something to do on 349B. It's a lot more civilized, I'm sure. Hardly civilized, Krzysztof laughed, a deep, tremulous sound that blended in with the general chaos of the ship as they neared the mess area. Anything B or lower is typically basic and naive. I imagine the inhabitants of such a planet would struggle to even conceptualize a Flesian's life if I explained it to them. I think you've forgotten which class Earth is in. I laughed at her brazen attitude, too used to it to be offended. If any one of the Flesians was well-meaning despite their words, it was this one. I haven't. But you cannot be the typical B-class Earthling. You were chosen by a literal archangel to serve after all. Krzysztof cocked her head, looking down at the apparent oddity that was me. I do wonder why humans are so often chosen as apostles, despite being so often found on lower-class planets. It's been millennia since the first enforcers were chosen, and Earthlings still make up almost half of selectees. That's not a coincidence. I wondered about as much, answering her with a big shrug. The Flesians aboard this ship were from an A-class planet, capable of such feats of technology and magic that they could prevent and treat many diseases we couldn't even detect on Earth yet. And not only had they already discovered warp speeds faster than light, but they'd practically solved the aging process of their own species, reducing it to less than 1/10 of its usual rate. Not to mention that they were about 10 times as physically strong as a human. Without my enforcer's uniform, I'd barely be able to shake one's hand without being crushed in the process. Then, compared to all of that, there was me, a failed air traffic controller, unable to keep up with the hustle and routine of long hours without making an error that had cost millions in drone collisions. I'd been disgraced on Earth that day, lost my job instantly, had no benefits or securities to fall back on, and was quickly burning through my savings. Was considering taking out more student loans at 28 and restarting my career in something completely new when I was suddenly approached by the angels. And by approached, I mean abducted. I thought the literal Christian God had beamed me up at first. I thought God was going to judge me for how much of a loser I was losing my job how I did. But instead, I found that not only were these not the angels I knew from books and looked about as human in origin as I did, but they didn't judge or ridicule me whatsoever. Instead, I was made privy to information no human on Earth seemed to know. Truths about the wider galaxy and those beyond, about other worlds, about magic and technology beyond the wildest dreams of anyone I'd met back home. I glimpsed the advent of infinity, and I was given a choice. Stay ignorant and go back, or serve as a soldier for the benevolent guides of the universe, who chose to reveal themselves only to a seldom few. To this day, I had no clue why they'd picked me. I only hoped that I'd prove to be worth it in the end. I was greeted with waves and salutes as soon as I made my way into the mess hall. Technically, I didn't carry a rank, but besides Krzysztof, who I'd spent the most time with, almost every Flesian seemed to carry some measure of either fear or respect for me, while often the two intermingled. Grand Enforcer, an ensign said as he vacated his seat, clearing the space for me. I had to rely on Krzysztof to help me up onto the bench quickly, as it was almost 5 feet in the air. But luckily, no one had the gall to stare. I didn't really know how I felt about being feared, especially by massive one-eyed space aliens with the power to crush ancient oaks between their thighs. As I sat down, conversation resumed its natural flow around me. Capacitor's cores emitting eddies again. Turbulence is going to be the least of our problems if we don't smooth the matrix. 15 minutes in this nebula is enough to exacerbate the existing microtears. If they become untenable, we're just going to end up behind again. You'd have rather gone around, huh? That was 2 of the kitchen staff to my left, sat there munching and chatting on their break. The fact I barely even followed the casual conversations of the kitchen workers aboard this vessel just made me feel even more out of place. Hey, Cyrus, what do you want? Grilled cheese? Yeah, if you don't mind, what you gonna have? Krzysztof shrugged. I'll just get something synthesized. Close my eyes and press a random button. Krzysztof made me feel like I fit in. She got up and left, knowing it was more hassle than I like to get up and down from one of these benches too many times. I caught smiles as I waited. Occasionally someone would strike me up in conversation. I liked it here. I could definitely feel out of place fairly often, but ultimately, most of the Flesians made an effort, even if some, like the captain, would rather see the back of me. It wasn't just fear that made this partnership work, it was the ethic of the crew. I watched Prishta bounding back over to me, smiling with manic rows of teeth as she clutched a massive grilled cheese sandwich the size of my head for me and a large slab of meat for herself in the arm beneath. I watched and I smiled back at her. Then, a massive chunk of debris smashed into Prishta's side and sent her crashing into the far wall as the ceiling exploded. My grilled cheese hit the floor just as limply as Prishta did, and with the exact same velocity, my happiness vanished. Taking off, I engaged the thrusters around my ankles and soared across the now weightless room towards Prishta's fallen body as artificial gravity began to ensue around me, though only then did 30 new aliens drop down right in front of me, ready and eager to fuck me up. A quick scan from my system informed me that said aliens were called the Kraz, a species from outside the Federation known for their numerous population and ability to create sapient technology they could link their spirits to. Before I could hear the next part of the message, I was forced to duck as a stream of blasts beamed straight in my direction. Engaging my suit's combat stance and preparing a spell, I blasted a furnace of heat directly into the maelstrom of combatants still dropping right in front of me, singeing and burning up many of them as more Flesians took up the fight around me, physically overpowering their foes, though it was soon clear we were hopelessly outnumbered. I dodged 3 blasts and my suit absorbed 2 more before I activated my astral blade and used it to tear through 3 more Kross in a line, bisecting all of them. It had taken me time to become this strong, years of training on foreign worlds, of missions, and while I wasn't sure if all of that fighting had been for the best reasons, if any of what I did was, I knew that right now, my strength was important for keeping my crew alive. For keeping Prishta alive, if she even still was. 5 aliens dogpiled me at the same time, these ones outfitted with spark gloves and melee weapons, and I had to filter a decent portion of my mana into my armor in order to absorb the blows and repel all 5 of them. I took to the air, soles of my suit burning jet blue flame as I looked to survey the situation. I couldn't unleash anything too heavy here. Even if I was careful not to hit anything vital on the ship, the prospect of collateral damage was too high, and there was no telling if any of these now hundreds of Kross carried high ordnance explosives. Still, each Flesian was worth about 10 Kross from what I could see of the fighting, and there were at least 1,000 Flesians on the ship. The problem was the tide of Kross seemed to be near unending, and if I couldn't find a means to stem the tide, Grand Enforcer, where are you going? I ignored it. I needed to ignore it if I wanted them to live. The Flesians were so much smarter than me. If I had time to explain the extent of my abilities to them, I'm sure they could have figured me out a better plan than I could ever come up with. But time was not our ally. I flew through the open fracture, my helmet auto-equipping as I did so. Nebula space was damaging to most systems, but my suit could handle short exposure. If I could find a way to seal the damage and stem the invasion until we were out of the nebula field, then we could make a new warp jump. It was the only way. Synthesizing a hermetic seal was difficult enough on the fly, but when there were 50 aliens attacking you at once, it was that much harder. Flesians followed me, assuming that I'd need the assistance, distracting and picking off some of my attackers, giving me the time to seal up the damage to the hull that connected the exterior to the mess hall. That was 1 hole down, but 5 more had popped up in the time that I'd done even that much. The boarding party was unrelenting. Thousands of Kross could be seen floating between here and their mothership, an absolutely gargantuan vessel that seemed to move and shift like a living creature might, a testament to the power of these aliens, a crude-looking monstrosity that was in reality more intricate than anything I'd ever seen. If the Kross were in the Federation, I was sure they'd be S-class. It wasn't long until I spotted something more beyond, something flying at the edge of the nebula, something strange, long, and made of shimmering silver scales. I pulled my system up to confirm what I was seeing, trying to focus on it, but to no avail. The system didn't have a protocol in place for identifying this specific creature. The only reason I had even an inkling of what it was is that I'd been briefed by the archangels themselves on such entities. Specifically, I'd been told to avoid them. I considered my options for only a moment. Stay and defend a doomed vessel, attack tens of thousands of craws alone, or fly straight at the thing I'm not meant to? I took off without hesitation. The Flesians behind me might have been confused, but there was nothing I could do but go. If I was correct, and I wasn't sure how I could be wrong, then what I was staring at before me was a wish dragon, one of the handful of cosmic dragons that roam the universe by their own mysterious whims. These dragons were also right at the top of the angels' do not engage list. And while I wasn't really someone to question orders or break protocol, I figured I had good enough basis right now to need a fucking wish dragon. Hang on, Prishta. It's all I could think as I launched my way through countless craws, a silver bullet gleaming red as more and more of them collided with my armor. Still, they attempted to stop me, entirely undeterred by the bloody death of their comrades. They were beginning to gain a foothold in our fight before I'd taken off. But now, even if they had an idea of how to neutralize me, they wouldn't be able to accelerate at my rate, to catch up in time to halt me before I could approach the great and terrifying beast flying in transit before me. The Krau's ship seemed to notice the dragon right after I did, as it similarly changed course, flying straight towards it. Like me, it was also in the nebula, where it had laid in wait, so its speed was also impacted, and the massive ship and I were in deadlock as we approached the impossibly long creature, the ship taking occasional potshots at me while I spun evasive maneuvers, aware that a single shot from such a vessel would likely be enough to pierce even this incredible suit, which was surely S-class in design. Not many things could kill me in one shot like a full-on proton blast. But then I was also a tiny target, and as I began to overtake the vessel, they stopped attempting to shoot me and put all of their remaining effort into catching up to the creature before me. They were clearly aware of what I was trying to do, and their reaction only confirmed my suspicion that my strong hunch had been correct. All I needed was to make a wish, to make a wish, to make a, "You have approached me without permission. State your purpose, and I will judge your conviction." The voice was in my head, and so powerful that it felt it might split not only my mind, but my body directly in two. I was frozen, perhaps 3 miles away from the great pristine white beast, and the massive Krau's vessel was similarly suspended, wriggling in hopes of release. I knew what I wanted. I'd always wanted this. I had no doubts. I cleared my throat. "I want you to save me and my crew from this nebula. Get us away from these aliens and save us." For a long time, almost too long, the dragon was silent. Neither I nor the enemy vessel moved. A part of me hoped that this had at least provided enough distraction for my ship to escape, regardless of the outcome. Asterisk, the Krau's warbird has more faith in its wish. That wish is simple: the termination of every Republic life aboard your vessel and the acquisition of your technology. They have not dithered as you have, and so I will grant, of course. I was one person. The Krau's warbird held the combined desires and wants of every Kraus aboard, linked through their sapient tech. Meanwhile, I was plagued with doubts, with worries, about my old life and my new one, about the purpose of the things I did and the issues with my missions, about where I fit into the universe, about my bravery, my pride, my "No!" I shouted through the voice that tore at my mind and scathed my spirit. I shouted the word until my throat was raw. Then, in a feat of movement I could scarcely register, the dragon turned its impossibly large body to face me directly. "You would interrupt me? Those you call gods cower before me and dare not speak my name, and you would choose to—" I tried beyond anything to force out my next words. It was almost impossible. The sheer pressure of the wish dragon's voice on my mind was so much to bear that I could feel my internal system shutting down, that all cognizant thought was forced from my mind by the primordial presence filling it that it'd be easier to drift in empty space and fade. Just me! I forced the words from my throat like molten lava. I knew what I was willing to do, no matter how much it hurt, no matter where it took me or how it happened. I knew. The dragon regarded me like I was a strange animal it had encountered. It snorted, the nebula pushed away like a plastic bag from a single flare of its nostrils. It considered me, considered my plea, considered my worth. Eventually, the behemoth nodded. Fine, just you then. Before I could open my mouth to respond, I felt a transporter lock onto me and beam me back onto my ship. The nebula was lifted. The Kraz had been locked in place long enough for our hyperdrive to engage. We were pushed back into space in mere instants, so far from where we'd been only moments ago that it felt as if it could have been a daydream. I saw Prishta amongst the wounded. She was alive still, at least. I could feel myself beginning to fade already. It was the pact I'd made with the dragon. The only thing I could think to offer that would show my dedication eclipsed that of the Kraz. My body, my spirit, everything I had to give for a crew that had welcomed me. Better than any questionable mission I'd served or purpose I'd pondered or heroic life I'd been promised. This was a true heroic act. I could find peace in that. I removed my armor. It was heavy. I laid on the floor of the mess hall, tuning out the sounds of the concerned Flesians around me. I felt my soul leave my body and held faith that it'd find its way where it needed to go. I felt warmth. I felt peace. Humans are not chosen because they are the strongest, nor because they're the most righteous or the smartest or the wisest or any such thing. Humans are chosen because they are irreverent, because they defy the natural order of things, because even in the face of harsh and crushing reality, if a human believes they can change that reality, they'll go to incredible lengths for even the smallest chance to do so. Humans should be kept in the dark. Their civilizations should not be permitted under any circumstance to advance too far. Only a certain number of human agents should be selected and employed by handlers at any one given time. Always remember, attempting to control humans is dangerous.